currently we are lacking an important level of control, and that's the ability to isolate parts of our face in the material. And the reason we would want to do this, if I kind of compare our render to our reference, is commonly the nose and the forehead are fairly shiny parts of the face when it comes to specular reflection. Whereas with our render, they're particularly dull. And I want the ability to isolate those specific areas for manipulating shader parameters. But it's not limited to specular reflection. I might also want to use it to reduce the amount of subsurface scattering in a particular area. And I find this level of control better to have and not need than to need and not have. So I want to show you how we can set that up. Although it would help if we talk about the specific zones of the face. As I've already mentioned, areas like the forehead commonly need to have a boost in specular reflection. The nose, same thing. The ocular region, the lips, as well as the ear, which is usually quite dull around the helix. But as we reach the interior of the ear, it tends to get a bit more shiny. And also on this inside edge of the eyelids, this tends to look very wet, so that's very low roughness. And then also on the neck, commonly this is just a little too reflective and needs to be toned down. So let's see, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 zones of the face. And we can use vertex groups to paint these zones and use them in our material. Let's switch to slot 2 and then go back to our 3D view. And we'll set up our viewport to be studio lighting, vertex as the color. Let's go to our object data and add a new vertex color. We'll call this Face Zones 1. And now we can jump into vertex paint mode and first set everything to black. So I've got black as my color, and then Shift K fills all our verts with black. So the colors I'm going to use are important. Let's leave the black, hit X to switch to our other color swatch, which is also black. So I want to use pure red, pure green, and pure blue. So for our first color, we'll paint red. And the reason being, in our shader editor, we have a converter, separate RGB, which will conveniently grab those pure colors and convert them to a white and black factor. And this won't work unless the colors are pure red, pure green, and pure blue. So starting with the forehead, I'm going to start painting, and we want the strength up to 1. Initially, I'm going to paint kind of a bold version, high contrast version of these zones, and then we're going to smooth it out once we've blocked them out first. And this is painting a little bit slower than I anticipated. I always tend to underestimate the burden of recording on the system, but we'll manage fine. So we've painted our forehead. Let's switch to a green color. Just turn red all the way off, green all the way on, and leave blue all the way off. And now I want to select the ocular region in edit mode, so we'll turn on our overlays. Also, I want to select the basis shape key because this will enable us to select symmetrically. And so I want to alt-click an edge loop around our eyelids, or it's a face loop actually. Let's grow that selection a bit. Let's say to here. C circle select and finish up the loop there. Shift Control M will mirror our selection to the other side. I want to make sure to enable extend so we get both the before selection and mirrored selection. And then tab back to vertex paint mode. We'll enable our selection masking and Shift K to fill that with green. Disable selection masking, tab into edit mode. I guess I didn't need to disable that. And next I want to select the lips. So I'm going to go into the mouth cavity, alt-click an edge loop, face loop, face loop. We're in face mode. And once I select the lips, we'll go back to vertex paint, enable selection masking, change our color to blue, Shift K, and then disable selection masking. So the unfortunate part is we are limited to just these 3 colors. So to achieve the 8 zones of the face, I think is what I counted, we're going to need 3 sets of vertex groups. It's not a big deal, but to me it would seem cleaner if I could do all these colors in one vertex group. And I've experimented with a way to do the in-between colors, right? So like red and green making yellow, green and blue making cyan, red and blue making magenta. But that doesn't work great whenever there's a gradient of the colors, compared to this where the purity of the color allows us to do things like blur on the edges, which is going to be the next part of painting these zones. So I want to blur everything with a paint smooth vertex groups command. And then we can switch to flat lighting. And that will blur them out to a certain degree. We don't get any options, I don't think, if we smooth vertex colors again. Yeah, we don't get any operator controls, and it only smooths to a certain degree. We can grab the blur brush to then smooth even more. Make sure our strength is all the way up at 1. I do like to feather these out a fair amount, and maybe even grab a black color and paint at a lower strength, like 0.5. Maybe even less than that, like 0.2. And you can vary this up a little bit if you want, or feather it out as your portrait needs. And then down here, I think the green is a little bit strong on the lower half. So let's take that down, strength of 0.5, and just kind of paint a little bit of that out. And then come back over it with a blur brush. Oops, I don't really want to cross the red and the green. Yeah, the lagginess in the viewport is pretty annoying. Maybe I'll just leave it unblurred up at the top. You don't have to be overly precise with this stuff. Just getting close is going to be enough. And then for the lips, I actually do like to reduce the amount around the vermilion border and kind of keep the most blue area concentrated where the lips touch. That tends to be the most wet. Around the vermilion border, unless the lips were just wetted, their specular isn't typically too much different than the skin surrounding the lips. All right, I think that looks pretty good. And that's it for face zone 1. Now if we jump over to object mode and we'll switch to rendered view, and then in our shader editor, we'll add an input vertex colors face zone 1, and then converter separate RGB. All right, we'll take the color and then shift control clicking on the R, the G, and the B. These are convenient factors which we can use to control various parameters. And so I'll do this 2 more times for the other zones of the face. We'll duplicate this vertex group and call it face zones 2. We'll jump back to solid view, vertex paint, and once again I need to shift K to fill the whole thing black. And the first zone I want to define in edit mode is going to be the edge or the face loop around the eyelids, or that defines the thickness of the eyelids. So I guess that's the rim of the eyelids. Shift Control M to mirror that to the other side. It is including the caruncle. Tab back to vertex paint mode, and we'll make this one red. Turn on selection masking, Shift K. All right, this, if we load our eyes reference here, that's not the one I wanted. Eye details, that's the one. So as you can see, this rim of the eyelid tends to be wet like the sclera. And so it needs to be very reflective and especially clear reflection. So that's why I'm isolating it here. If this looks too dry in a close-up, this is a great example. But yeah, if this looks too dry in a close-up render, it definitely throws off the realism. So with that painted, we will disable selection masking and choose our next color. Let's go for green. And we'll paint the nose green. I'll turn on mirror painting in the x-axis. We'll just start painting the nose, focusing on the edge of the nose, the front of the nose, and fading out as we reach the cheek and columella. All right, so I'm at 0.5 strength. So I'm going to paint once again on the tip just to make that full strength. I think that should be pretty good. Remember, we're going to be blurring these once we do the initial block out. And next, I want to jump back into edit mode and using our seams as a border of the selection, let's hit L to do the inside and the outside. I guess I could just do the outside because I want this separate from the interior. I'm going to go ahead and select the interior as well, thinking of it as like a hierarchy, the whole ear isolated, and then next we'll do just the interior ear isolated. And I'm afraid if I do both of them separate, the blurred out border will cause problems between them. And so with that selected, Shift Control M to mirror the selection, and we will go back to vertex paint, change the color to blue, enable selection masking, Shift K. And then disable selection masking, paint, smooth vertex colors, And then come back with the blur brush and just make sure this is smoothed out well. And it's kind of spreading out maybe a little too far from the ear, because in all likelihood, I will take the ear and lower the specularity. So I don't think I want to lower the specularity on the area surrounding the ear. So I better paint some of this out. Switch to a black color and paint some of this. The reason I like to blur is I don't want any harsh transitions when I'm controlling these zones. There we go. That's going to work out fine. Really don't need to be too specific. And wow, I'm just realizing that this is cyan. This isn't even blue. So I mixed the green and the blue. Wow. Let's redo this. Select these verts in wireframe. Back to vertex paint. Selection masking, Shift K. Let's make a proper selection again. Shift Control M. And then set this to blue, not cyan. And I can run that smooth vertex operation again because it doesn't re-smooth what's already been smoothed. I find that interesting how that tool works. But back to drawing out some of the border, feathering that out a bit, and then we'll be done. You know, I don't think we'll ever see the back of the ear, but I don't think it's that dull. If anything, it's probably more shiny. So maybe I should paint some of that out of this mask, leaving it the same shininess as the rest of the skin. Okay, so that's going to be it for face zone 2. Well, should I smooth out a little bit of the nose? Probably so. Okay, one more zone to paint, or 2 zones to paint. New vertex group, face zones 3. And this will be the neck. We'll paint that red, or blue since it's already selected. And the interior of the ear. All right, so back to edit mode. We'll select the interior conveniently with the way we laid out the UVs. Enable selection masking, and we'll paint this green. And then disable selection masking, paint smooth vertex colors, and maybe feather this out a bit more, also giving it some variety. Okay, I think that's going to be good. Maybe I should paint out the neck a bit too. There's a pretty, obvious transition, and so I don't want to risk that being visible. All right, that's going to do it for our zones of the face. Back to object mode and switch to rendered view. And all we need to do is duplicate these nodes. Shift D to duplicate and change the number at the end to 2 and then one more to 3. And we do have an open color slot in that third one, so if we run into another zone that we want to control, we'll simply paint that one red if needed. And so now we've got easy access to all the zones of the face that we are interested in controlling.
I'd like to interject something here. In reviewing this part of the video, I realized it would have been much more intuitive if I had grouped these face zone nodes together, because that way I could give each of these RGB outputs a name, which would be much more efficient and cleaner than what you'll see me do, click through each inputs till I get the right one. So quickly, I want to show you how we can do this. We'll select these nodes with the B hotkey box select and then Control G. All right, now we can take each of these RGB outputs and plug it into the group output. And then if we select the group output node, hit the N key to bring up our properties panel. And if we go to the group tab, in outputs, we can click on each of these and rename them. But we need to shift control click on each one so we know what they are. Let's go to our rendered viewport. And the first red output is our forehead. All right, so we'll rename that. And do the next one. Shift control click. Green is our eyes. And we'll do the same thing all the way down. And note that our red channel in the third face zone is blank, so I represent that in the output name. We can always add that channel later if needed. But once everything is named and we tab out of group edit mode, Shift Control clicking on each of these, it's way more intuitive to pick which face zone we really want. It's also cleanly packaged together. We can rename this node group and then copy that to the label. And I really wish I had done this, mainly because it's going to get a little bit cluttered, but hopefully you'll do this and have a more efficient node network. Now to incorporate this into the material, there's a couple ways to do this. Let's make a little bit more room for our shader editor. You know, if we remember what I want to adjust, and it might help to remind us exactly what that is, let's go back to the man reference image and compare that to our render. The nose is especially dull in my opinion. Typically, the nose is shinier, if not one of the shiniest areas of the face. And so I want to reduce the roughness on just the nose. That will make the reflections clearer. You may have noticed by this point, I find that the roughness control is a little more powerful or reactive when it comes to controlling specular. So I like to start there and then adjust the specular amount if necessary, because I used to think that I need to increase the amount of reflections on the nose. But over time, I've realized if I reduce the roughness, it almost appears to increase in specular intensity, even though it's only increasing clarity. So yeah, a general principle, I tend to focus on roughness first, followed by specular amount. And so to focus on roughness, let's grab the nose factor. We'll go back to slot 2. Shift Control click on these till we get to the nose. I believe it's the green one here of the second vertex group. All right, so as I mentioned, there's several ways to implement this into the material. The most basic way is to go one by one. So we can add a color mix RGB node, and we can subtract the white level. All right, so by subtracting, we take it further towards black. So we'll change the mode to subtract, and then shift right click and drag to plug it into the factor. And then we control the amount of subtraction with the color in slot 2. All right, so a value of 0.5 is subtracting 0.5 from this color ramp, which is going to be too strong. That's going to make it super wet feeling. We want to be pretty subtle with this, so we can change the value to like 0.1. That'll make it a little shinier, maybe 0.2. And that's the general idea on how we can control that specific part of the face. But keep in mind, we have a bunch of different zones to control. So we could have like 6 or 7 different mix nodes lined up side by side. And so that I find is a little too cluttered. What I like to do instead is keep only one subtract node and create the combination of control in the zones together up top. And I'll show you what I mean. So the way I do this is find out which zones need the most adjustment. All right, so one more time, if we look at our render, let's try and think about the changes we're making. I know I want the nose to be brighter in terms of reflections. I know I want the forehead similarly, and arguably the most. Maybe the inside of the ear also needs the most adjustment. So let's start. You can only do 2 at a time. So we'll add the forehead plus the nose. And I really want to keep this render around. What if I split our viewport and then select our render result down here? That way we can continue referencing it. And so I want to mix the nose with the forehead. So color, mix RGB, and change this to an add. All right, that's going to take whatever is above 1, add it to color 1, and then we can control just how much of the nose in this case we add to the forehead. And then next, I think we said the interior of the ear. So let's find that. All right, it's here in green. We will Shift D to duplicate the add node and add the green. And it's probably not going to be a full factor. Let's go down to like 0.5. In other words, not as much of a roughness adjustment. And then next, I want to add the eyes. Here we go, the broader eye zone. So we can put that into slot 2, try and make this a little more readable. Okay, so over here, you can see how much we've added the eyes, and we can control how much with the factor there. So I don't think I want as much eye being added.
But, getting started, we know we won't end up perfect, but if we have something to assess, then we can come back and tweak these values easily later. And then if we think about the lips, I'm trying to think if I even need to adjust that zone because I do like the way it looks. So for now, I'll just leave it out. I don't have to use all these zones. I know from experience that it's common to want to adjust these, but sometimes they'll just work out. And the lips are an example where I think they do kind of work out. So let's leave that out of the combination for now. But there was another one that I want to add, and that's the rim of the eye. That actually needs to be a lot more reflective. So we'll add that at a level of 1. Okay, and now I have this combination that I can plug here. And then the exercise becomes the subtract down here. Our color value needs to be the maximum subtraction from our roughness color ramp. All right, so let's make that 0.5. And then anywhere up here in the additions that I'm less than 1, it's not going to be subtracted as much. And I actually think 0.5 is already too much. We don't want it to ever get to black. I don't know what I was thinking. So let's step it down. That seems a little more natural. So let's start with there and see what it looks like. That's going into roughness. It is a little bit confusing to look at. I think that's a bit better. And yeah, let's do a render and see if we're anywhere close to what we want. Let's see the before and after. This is before and after. Okay, so we see the nose before and after. It gets shinier. And I like the way it looks on the left side, but it might get a little bit too shiny on the right over here. What about the forehead? Okay, definitely more reflection there. A lot more. Where else? So around the eyes, it should have increased the clarity a little bit. And what I'm looking for is the sparkle right here. That gets a little more intense, which I like. Also, this section right here. How about the ears? Okay, we can see those highlights tighten just a little bit. And maybe the only other thing I want to do... Yeah, I like the way the highlight tightens over here too. Perhaps I should increase the value of the roughness. In other words, make it duller around the helix. I still think that's a little too shiny. The earlobe, a little too shiny for me. And also we should test this with other lighting conditions because I need a second opinion on the nose if that's too shiny or not. Oh, and the neck we also want to make a little more dull. Okay, so helix of the ear and neck. Let's make that a bit more dull. And I will just render over slot 2 so we can still easily compare with slot 1. And so this will mean another mix node as an addition rather than a subtraction. And that's for the helix, which is, let's see, must be the blue slot here. Okay, so I actually need to subtract the interior from this. So let's add a color mix node. And the helix, I think, is right here. And if we subtract that at a factor of 1, well, that's not exactly what I expected. What about if we enable clamp? That doesn't change anything. Do I need a color ramp? That's more what I'm after. A couple more nodes than I wanted to add. And then I will add one more component, the neck, which should be the blue. Yeah. And we'll just route that around the bottom here. Okay, so these factors need to be added to our roughness. And then we'll control exactly by what value with that second color slot. All right, so the higher we go, you can see that we're going to be more dull. 1 is going to be way too strong. I think 0.5 might be too strong too, but let's see how it does. Okay, that looks like, yeah, probably went a little too far, a little too dull. Yeah, definitely. I need to reduce that by probably half. So here, this color slot from 0.5, let's go to 0.2. And try again. Okay, that's looking better. Before and after. Yeah, I think that feels good. Better on the neck, better on the ear as well. Now, oh, remember when I talked about how I liked that 0.2 strength bump around the eyes? So this is where we can isolate the eyes and increase the bump only in that area. That's the last thing I'll do in this video. So we'll switch to slot 3. And I'll need to, let's see, combine the 2 eye zones, right? So I want to subtract this from this one, because I don't want to increase the bump strength around the rim of the eyelid. That's the most wet, shiniest part of the skin. So I want to eliminate that from the broader ocular zone. And so let's see, we'll start this noodle going above. All right, so let's duplicate one of these mixed nodes. I'll change it to a subtract. And we're going to take, I've already forgotten, we're going to subtract this one from this one. And it looks like I'll need another converter color ramp. It's turning into spaghetti. I don't like that. There we go. The rim of the eyelid completely subtracted. And I can add this just like I've been doing. Wow. Look at all this. It can get complex pretty fast. So what I want to do is add, let's see, I don't want to add to the incoming height. I want to add to the strength, right? The 0.1. All right, so we'll mix into color slot 2, and color zone 1 will be our strength that we established. So 0.1. No, I'm wrong. This goes into the factor, and then color slot 2 becomes the amount that we're adding. So we want it to be 0.1. There we go. You can see that the area around the eyes increases to 0.2 strength, and the rest stays at 0.1. I think I'm doing that math correctly. Okay, let's see full resolution. This is before and after. Yeah, it's a subtle change, but we can see the reflections kind of spread out a little bit. And yeah, I think that's going to work out nicely. Although I have to keep saying we are not at the perfect result yet. I still want to add some blemish details to the skin color, but with each video we're building up the tools we need to get to that perfect final result. So if I try to take a moment and zoom out, see the broader picture, I might be getting overzealous and into the kind of sweaty range, but I'm also learning that this particular environment map skews the reflections that way anyway. So I want to do another multiple lighting scenario test to fully understand the state of our specular level. Let's see what we have. Okay, so I think the forehead is a touch too shiny. In this render, it definitely feels a bit on the sweaty side. Here as well. So I should take that down. How about the nose? I actually think the nose feels pretty good. You know, in this first one, it feels the shiniest to me, a little on the oily side. But here, it doesn't feel too shiny at all. Here, it feels pretty good. And here, it feels good. So something kind of interesting this course has been making more apparent to me is just how much lighting does affect the feel of the specular reflections. Even though the material is not changing at all through these renders, sometimes the skin does feel more oily than others. Here I think it strikes a really good balance, even in the forehead. But there's enough evidence to still want to tone down the forehead a touch. But overall, I think we're in a really good place. Even if the skin is not 1000% perfected, we're slowly but surely building up all the components necessary to perfect it, and that's the majority of the battle in my opinion. So I'm going to end this video feeling positive about the progress.